We live?
We are live. Yes, we are.
Welcome everyone to the Thought Experiment, a debate series here on Skeptic Haven, and thank you all so much for joining us. Sorry about that, kind of new at this. Tonight we have the pleasure of bringing you all an amazing debate with two fantastic debaters. The subject of tonight's debate is which explains reality better, substance dualism or physicalism? It's a heady topic to be sure. Our interlocutors tonight are Dave Pallmann, who will be arguing for substance dualism, and Leophilius, who will be arguing for physicalism. I am JL from the channel Bridge the Divide. I'll try not to screw up any more, and I will be moderating tonight, so fingers crossed. Thank you for joining us. Man, just terrible. See, I'm setting the stage for you guys. I'm setting the tone. So I hope I broke the ice. I feel we're in a good spot, a good place to go. Now, I have no doubt that tonight is going to be a serious, in-depth exploration of the topic at hand. So to all of you audience members out there, be sure to stick it out to the end. And if you want to see more content like this, be sure to consensually smash that like and subscribe button, and definitely leave a comment below letting us know how we did, how you think we can improve, and of course, what you think of the topic and the debaters that we have here. So let's take a moment to meet our interlocutors. Gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and giving us a little bit of your background. We'll start with Dave, and then we'll hear from Leophilius. Dave.
Sure. My name is Dave Pallmann. I run the YouTube apologetics ministry, Faith Because of Reason. Among other things, I like to defend the existence of the soul. This will be my second debate with Leo. I know he's a sharp guy, and so I'm looking forward to getting into it tonight.
Excellent. Thank you. And Leo.
Hi, I'm Leophilius, and I'm a random guy on the internet who likes to do debates sometimes.
I like it. Bearing the lead. All right. Tonight's debate format will be 12 minutes for each for introductory statements, 10 minutes for each for rebuttals, 40 minutes for open conversation, and 5 minutes each for closing statements. So if you two gentlemen are ready to begin, Dave will start us off. Dave, we will start the timer for you when you start speaking.
Let me try to share my screen here so you can see my slides. Let me know if you can see that. Everyone able to see that?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Well, in today's debate, I will be defending the thesis of substance dualism, the thesis that the human person consists of two substances, a material body and an immaterial mind or soul. Let me just give some quick definitions to the audience so that they have some idea of how I'm using these terms. By the term substance, I refer to an essentially characterized particular, or in layman's terms, the characteristics that cannot be removed from something without thereby removing the thing itself. Both the notions of material or physical and immaterial or non-physical are notoriously difficult to define. But without getting into the weeds of how to resolve long-standing issues like Hempel's dilemma and the problem of individuation, for the purposes of this debate, it suffices to stipulate that physical or material entities are the sorts of things that are both extended in space and are publicly accessible, at least in principle, to multiple conscious agents at once. For example, a tree would be a physical object because multiple people can all see it at the same time. Conversely, a non-physical or immaterial thing is not extended in space and is metaphysically private in the sense that it is something that cannot be publicly accessed by multiple conscious agents, even in principle, but rather only by one particular agent. There's a lot more to say here, but time precludes me from giving a full analysis of these terms. Consequently, these definitions will have to suffice. So now that we have some idea of what it means for the human person to be both material and immaterial, let's turn to consider the reasons why someone might think that this thesis is true. I will offer 3 arguments in support of substance dualism. First, let us consider my favorite argument for dualism, Descartes' modal argument. I would formalize it this way. Whatever is conceivable is possible. It is conceivable that my mind, with all its past and present thought properties, is immaterial. Therefore, it is possible that my mind is immaterial. it is not possible for my mind, with all its past and present thought properties, to be both material and immaterial across different possible worlds. Therefore, it is not possible that my mind is material. Therefore, my mind is immaterial. Premise 1 is the premise that I suspect Leo will find the most objectionable. So I will return to this one after briefly surveying the reasoning behind the others. Premise 2 should be straightforward enough. Plainly thought experiments involving Descartes' malicious omnipotent demon, brains and vats, the matrix, and so on and so forth are all conceivable. Additionally, metaphysical idealism, or so-called out-of-body experiences, appear to be straightforwardly conceivable. Premise 3 follows deductively from premises 1 and 2. Premise 4 asserts the thesis of trans-world identity. Consider two possible worlds, one that contains only physical things and one that contains no physical things at all. Here's the question. Are there any things that are the same in both worlds? If you answered negatively, then I think you should accept the fourth premise. If my mind is physical in the actual world, then it could not exist in a world where there are no physical things while remaining the same mind. And similarly, if my mind is immaterial in the actual world, then it could not exist in a world where only physical things exist while remaining the same mind. For this reason, I think that the fourth premise is true. And premises 5 and 6 are simple entailments from the preceding premises. So that returns us to premise 1, which is probably the most contentious premise in this argument. So why think that it is true? Well, quite simply because conceivability is the best way to determine what is possible. Complete modal skepticism is a non-starter since it renders basically even everyday decision-making unworkable, and limited modal skepticism suffers from the problem of arbitrarily restricting the items of our modal knowledge to everyday affairs without providing any sort of explanation or motivation for this thesis. So if these sorts of options are off the table, then we need some sort of theory that explains how we are able to possess it. It will be interesting to see if Leo can provide us any sort of robust alternative to conceivability. But until then, I maintain that conceivability remains our best guide to determining possibility. And this justifies us in accepting premise 1. And since that is the last remaining vulnerable premise, we are left with the conclusion that my mind is immaterial. My second argument is based upon the indirect realist theory of perception. Indirect realism is the idea that the immediate objects of sensory impressions are mental representations of the physical objects beyond them. In other words, when I look at a tree, I am not directly seeing the tree, but rather a mental image that my mind has generated of the tree. And this position contrasts with direct realism, which holds that I actually see the tree itself. So now that we understand what indirect realism is, I'll show you how it leads to the truth of dualism. The argument looks like this. Premise 1, if indirect realism is true, then immaterial mental entities exist. Premise 2, indirect realism is true. Conclusion, therefore immaterial mental entities exist. The first premise is true by definition, since the representations or mental images that indirect realism entails are in no way situated within the brain, or indeed anywhere else within the physical world. If they exist, they would have to be immaterial. As the philosopher Howard Robinson puts it, theories in the philosophy of perception that belong to the sense datum family postulate private objects of awareness that possess such sensible qualities as color, shape, sound, felt texture, and the like. Such objects are not, however, to be found in the brain, and if there were little green patches, smells, and noises observable in the brain, this would still not tell us what it is to be aware of them. It did not take materialists long to realize, therefore, that phenomenal objects are part of the Cartesian conception of consciousness as a non-physical inner arena, and that they are, consequently, something that they must reject. Obviously, the conclusion follows necessarily from the two premises, So the only really vulnerable premise is premise 2. Fortunately, the evidence in support of premise 2 is just overwhelming. Consider something as simple as the time lag between when events actually occur and when we see them. Ordinarily, of course, this time lag is very brief, consisting of only milliseconds. However, it can be more pronounced in the case of, for example, seeing a star supernova. By the time we see a supernova, the event occurred thousands or even millions of years ago. So unless we are able to see into the past, which no longer exists, we are forced to conclude that we are experiencing a present effect or representation of something that no longer exists. And this entails that indirect realism is true. Consider also the phenomenon of double vision. If you take an object like your finger or a pencil and bring it right in front of your nose, the pencil or your finger will appear to divide in two. But since the pencil or your finger does not actually divide in this way, we must be perceiving two mental images, neither of which is numerically identical to the pencil or to your finger itself. Once again, this entails indirect realism. Then there is the phenomenon of illusions. Got a picture of it up here for you. Consider the Hermann grid illusion, where black spots seem to appear and disappear along a checkered background, even though no such spots are present in the physical stimulus. This presents an obvious case of the mind adding something that is not physically present to the experience. And indirect realism can easily explain this because it insists that the mind constructs mental images that represent physical reality rather than affording us a window directly into it. And this is to say nothing of dreams and hallucinations, which further demonstrate the capacity of the mind to create mental images that are not present in the physical world at all. All in all, I think that the case for indirect realism is fairly conclusive. But if so, then the conclusion of the argument follows irresistibly. The last argument that I wish to present is a version of the argument from introspection, which I like to call the argument from certainty. I would formulate it as follows. For every physical state of affairs, knowledge of it is fallible. But knowledge of at least some of my own mental states is not fallible. Therefore, at least some of my own mental states are not physical states. The first premise is based on the observation that all knowledge of physical states of affairs is based on sensory perception. And for the reasons already covered, we can never know infallibly that we are not dreaming or hallucinating or victims of the matrix. And so given this, I think that we are more than warranted in accepting the first premise as true. The second,
warning,
more controversial. However, I think that it's easy to locate examples of mental states that are known infallibly. Suppose you are experiencing an intense migraine. You go to the hospital. Suppose that the doctor thoroughly examines you and can find nothing physically wrong and nothing that would indicate that you are in pain. No C fibers are firing. In this scenario, I think you would still know with certainty your own mental state of being in intense pain. But we can move beyond intuition. Without the ability to know some mental states infallibly, I think that global skepticism follows. Consider what it means to possess epistemic justification for a belief. This means that the belief is either certainly true or probably true. But if we reject that anything is known infallibly, then beliefs cannot be justified with certainty. So that only leaves you with probability. But probability is always relative to something else. There has to be something further to make the truth of a belief probable. And so unless you have an infallible stopping point, you either end up with an infinite regress of probabilities, or you end up with nothing, since without an infallible foundation, there is nothing from which probability can accrue. I take an infinite regress of justification to be untenable. Hence, I conclude that you have to be able to know something with certainty in order to know anything at all. But if something can be known with certainty, then the second premise of the argument from certainty is true, and the conclusion follows. It looks like I'm out of time, but I just wanted to close by thanking Leo for agreeing to this debate. I really do enjoy our interactions, and I'm looking forward to the remainder of this debate. So with that being said, I will stop and turn things over to Leo.
Thank you so much, Dave. Actually, you were pretty close, 2 seconds away. So well done. Well done. All right, it's time for Leo. Leo, let me reset the timer, and we will start on your first word. Think you're muted.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
There we go. Now we got
it's not a stream if somebody doesn't start talking when they're muted. We all know this. That's just the rules. I don't make the rules.
Or just stare blankly at the camera while we're live.
Yeah. So this is a debate tonight on physicalism versus substance dualism. These are views in philosophy that deal with at least with respect to the topic of tonight's debate, with consciousness, with our minds. Under physicalism, our minds are just the result of physical processes. Under substance dualism, our minds are something more than just the physical. And so I'd like to start with defining some terms. I take substance dualism to be the thesis that there is the physical body and brain, that there's also a non-physical substance that contains the elements of the mind, things that might be called qualia or subjective experience or phenomenal consciousness that interacts with the physical body and brain. There are two substances, one physical and one non-physical, that are at play here, hence the term substance dualism. I take physicalism to be the thesis that the mind is either reductively or non-reductively produced exclusively by the physical body and the brain, such that there are no non-physical elements at play in the ontological picture of consciousness. In what consciousness is as a thing in the world, it isn't anything over and above the physical elements of the reality that we find ourselves in. And the first argument I'd like to present for physicalism is an argument developed by the philosopher Hyek-Won Kim, if I'm getting his name correctly. I think that I am. And he calls it the pairing problem. And the question that is asked by this problem to get it going is this idea of how can something that is non-physical, like our minds under substance dualism, pair with any particular body over another. Our minds are, under substance dualism, non-physical substances and are not extended through space. They have no spatial locality. Locality is not a thing that is relevant to what our minds are or their causal interactions with the physical body and brain. However, our bodies are physical things that are extended through space. And so what Hyek-Won Kim wants to ask is, what pairs my mind with my body if not some sort of spatial co-locality? What is it that allows my mind to control and only control my body rather than any of the other bodies that exist? If we're dealing with two fundamentally dissimilar substances, what pairs one substance with another in the determinable ways that we observe in our everyday lives? I can't lift JL's arm for him, and he can't go punch my cat for me. Why is that the case? So substance dualism, I don't think, has provided, and obviously I don't have time to get into all of the literature surrounding the pairing problem and the responses to it, but I do not believe that the substance dualists have given a robust picture for how it is that non-physical substances pair with physical substances in ways that are determinable. And I think that this shows that substance dualism lacks explanatory power here. And I think that that is a pretty powerful point against substance dualism as a robust metaphysical picture of consciousness. Now, in thinking of the pairing problem, something popped into my head that I don't think, at least you'll find this anywhere in the literature, but it's sort of an extension to the pairing problem, you might call it, something that I considered. Minds, again, under substance dualism, are non-physical entities, which means they're unextended through space, which means that if they do, granting that they causally interact with physical substances, that causal interaction is not going to be furnished by any sort of spatial co-locality with the physical substance. So it seems that if substance dualism were true, and it therefore follows that the mind can cause things to happen in the physical body without there being any sort of spatial collocation. Why is it then that if I were to sever one of my limbs, I can no longer control it? It seems that under a substance dualist view, if I cut off a finger or a hand or an arm or a leg, since spatial colocality is irrelevant to how this non-material substance interacts with the body, it shouldn't matter where in space my limb happens to be located. My mind should be able to control it nonetheless, particularly if there is some sort of pairing between my mind and my body. Then me severing my leg shouldn't break that pairing, assuming that spatial colocality, again, is irrelevant here. So this is just something that I was thinking about, and I think that I think at least prima facie, it's good evidence against substance dualism that if I sever one of my limbs, I no longer have control over it. I think that this is very well explained under a physicalist picture, where all of the physical connections in the central nervous system are severed. Therefore, those signals can no longer be sent to the limb. Therefore, you have lost control over that limb. So the pairing problem is sort of related to this next problem I'd like to raise, known as the interaction problem. This is, in my mind, and I would argue, though it's probably somewhat controversial in the minds of most philosophers, a decisive argument against interactionist dualist pictures, is the interaction problem. The pairing problem is oftentimes considered, something maybe under the interaction problem. They are certainly very closely related. And the interaction problem asks us, if the causal interactions under substance dualism are non-spatial, spatial collocation does not matter to them, then what are the relations between the physical and the non-physical? What's furnishing these causal relations such that we can say that there's some causal connection between what the mind is doing and the body's response to it? When I raise my arm, that decision was made in my mind. Under substance dualism, my mind is a non-physical substance, but my arm is physical. What bridges the gap between these two fundamentally dissimilar ontologies such that one can be said to causally interact with the other? What's furnishing the causal interaction? What is interacting with what? And what makes it an interaction specifically? And if there just is no interaction, which some more so property dualists are willing to grant, if there is no interaction, then it just seems that this non-physical substance is superfluous. It's just unnecessary in the causal picture. It would be like arguing that gravity works exactly the way the general relativity describes it, but there's actually some fairies, some special gravity fairies that are making it all work that way. Well, if you can't explain how these fairies interact with mass or with space-time, or how they causally produce any sort of curvature, then you have added nothing extra to the causal picture that accounts for anything in a way that refines our explanatory models. And what you have added is just superfluous. And I think that if it's superfluous, it can be dismissed. Even if I granted that it does exist, it doesn't exist in any way that has any meaningful bearing on our everyday lives. And I think for that reason, it can be dismissed. The third problem that I have with substance dualism is its lack of theoretical virtuousness, at least as compared to physicalism. So theoretical virtuousness is something that a lot of philosophers of science will talk about. And it's sort of the desiderata, I shouldn't use technical jargon here, the things that we want in the things that we desire to have in our scientific models or in our explanatory models of the world. And I think that physicalism, as a metaphysical thesis about the ontology of consciousness, is much more theoretically virtuous than substance dualism, in virtue of the fact that physicalism can allow for there to be various causal relations, at least well-defined causal relations between the mind and the brain. If the mind is just some sort of physical process, then it's not hard to account for why the mind can causally affect the physical body and other things in the physical world. Physicalism is more parsimonious. It's ontologically simpler. It doesn't have us positing some other entirely novel, fundamentally dissimilar ontology added into the picture of things that we already know exist. I presume we all agree that the physical world at least does exist and that we are a part of it. So physicalism is more parsimonious. I think it fits better with the empirical models that we have. I think that physicalism fits better with our models of chemistry and how chemistry relates to the brain, and physics and neuroscience and biology, because it doesn't add anything more than those things to the picture. It seeks to explain what we're observing in virtue of those elements of the picture. So in virtue of requiring no additional ontological commitments or presumptions beyond what we already know, in terms of being able to appeal to well-defined causal mechanisms, and in virtue of things like assuming some sort of spatial co-location, I think physicalism just fits better with our picture of how the world works. And for that reason, I think physicalism should be favored over substance dualism as an ontological thesis about what consciousness is, what the mind is, and how it fits in with our picture of the world. And so in conclusion, I think that the pairing and the interaction problems don't have any, at least immediately obvious solution. And I think that they do pose a substantial issue for the substance dualist view, because I think that it leaves a lot of that view wanting. What sorts of causal interactions are there? Are the interactions even causal? And if they're not, what are they? If they are causal, in virtue of what are these causal interactions furnished? So I think that's a major problem with substance dualism, particularly if it seeks to be any sort of explanation for what our consciousness is and how we can consciously interact with the world. But I also think that lacking theoretical virtuousness is always going to be problematic for any supposed research program, or you might say scientific or just explanatory model that tries to account for something in the world. And I think that lacking an explanatory picture is generally not favored. And for that reason, I think that we should question the merits of substance dualism. And I think that physicalism, I do think that physicalism sort of wins out over substance dualism, certainly in the areas of explanatory virtues. And I think that that's probably going to be the primary reason that I take physicalism over substance dualism, and I encourage everyone else to do the same.
Okay, thank you so much, Leo. Let me stop that and reset that. There. All right, we are ready for rebuttals. Gentlemen, you each have 10 minutes. Dave, we'll start with you, your rebuttal to Leo's position, and we'll start on your first word.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you for that opening, Leo. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you for letting me take a look at it beforehand in order for us to have a more substantive interaction. Allow me to begin by quibbling a little bit over your definition of substance dualism. You included the idea that the mind interacts with the physical body. I don't disagree that this happens, but I do disagree that this is an essential component of substance dualism. Theoretically, if one could disprove mind-body interaction, all of my arguments for substance dualism would still stand. So substance dualism merely requires that the human person consists of both a material and immaterial substance. It does not necessarily require that the two causally interact, though, as I said, I agree that they do. So your first argument against dualism is the pairing problem, popularized, as you said, by Jaegwon Kim. As far as I can tell, the argument assumes that spatial location is required for causal interaction. I'm inclined to just deny this. But even if one accepts it, substance dualists are free to believe that the soul is, in fact, spatially located. Substance dualism only entails that the soul is not spatially extended. If this is so, then the spatial location requirement is met, and there is no pairing problem for the substance dualist. As Brandon Rickabaugh and J.P. Moreland put it, quote, virtually all contemporary substance dualists believe the soul is spatially located, even though it is not extended. Some provide arguments for the soul being located in one specific place in the body. Others believe that the soul is to the body as God is to space. namely fully present at each location in the body. Either way, the spatial location requirement is satisfied, end quote. Andrew Brenner demonstrated recently in his book, Personal Ontology, that the pairing problem objection is reversible against physicalism. If it applies to substance dualism, then it equally applies to physicalism. As Brenner explains, quote, according to Kim, the substance dualist must provide an answer to the question of why souls enter into certain sorts of causal relations with some bodies rather than others, since the pairing cannot be brute. Kim argues that the dualist will be hard-pressed to put forth a satisfying answer. So too, I claim, those who believe we are composite objects will be hard-pressed to put forward satisfying answers to questions such as, why is this composite person composed of these parts rather than some other parts? And why do these parts compose this person rather than some other composite person? More importantly, those who identify us with composite objects have no response to the mereological pairing problem that is not also available to the substance dualist in response to the pairing problem for substance dualism. So, once again, we have a parity. If pairing problem concerns undermine substance dualism, then they also undermine the view that we are composite objects. And if pairing problem concerns do not undermine the view that we are composite objects, then they do not undermine substance dualism, end quote. Your second argument springs from the so-called interaction problem. I say so-called because it's never clear to me what the problem is even supposed to be. It appears to be little more than a question pertaining to how the soul and body interact. But even if I had no idea how they could interact, how exactly would this indicate that the soul does not exist? Leo's questions throughout his presentation of this argument appear to be seeking a mechanistic explanation for soul-body interaction. But I don't even accept that the two interact in this way at all. I would venture to suggest that the soul interacts with the body via a direct causal relation, absent intervening mechanisms. Nor can the existence of such relations be denied, for any causal chain that does not extend infinitely into the past must terminate in such a relation. As David Lund observes, the dualist will likely take the position that the self, by willing, affects the brain directly, and that the notion of direct causation cannot plausibly be rejected. This is a defensible position, for it seems highly plausible to maintain that if causation occurs at all, some instances of it must be direct. Thus, the how question is misplaced if it is one about what intermediary causal links occur between the willing and the brain event, end quote. Lastly, this objection is likewise reversible. How is it that two material entities interact with one another? Leo proposes spatial contact, but that doesn't actually explain the interaction. Why is it that one physical object causes another to move when they come into contact? I presume that Leo would explain this by reference to energy transferring from the first object to the next. But how does that transfer take place? Eventually, the physicalist, too, will have to appeal to a direct causal relation that cannot be explained further. But if that explanation is available to the physicalist, then it should likewise be available to the dualist. Hence, whatever mystery surrounds mind-body interaction is the result of the concept of causation itself, not some problem inherent to substance dualism. As Sandra Menson and Thomas Sullivan put it, quote, admittedly, we have no idea how mind can move matter, but how big a problem is this? It could be monumental if it were not for one thing. In the end, we have no idea how matter moves matter. Despite what is sometimes said, we do not actually experience physical causality in any deep way. We see that matter moves matter in some sense, but we do not see why or how it happens, end quote. I agree with you that physicalism is more parsimonious than dualism. However, parsimony is an epistemic tiebreaker when all else stands equal between two rival hypotheses. I maintain that all else is not equal between physicalism and dualism. Specifically, physicalism lacks the explanatory resources to explain modal facts about ourselves, the existence of sense data, and items of epistemically certain knowledge. So given the explanatory poverty of physicalism, I think that the additional ontological commitments of dualism are more than warranted. Matthew Owen sums up the point this way, quote, "One weakness of the simplicity argument is that it rests upon one and only one theoretical virtue. Simplicity is significant, but it's not the only theoretical virtue. There are additional theoretical virtues to consider, such as explanatory power, explanatory scope, fertility, internal coherence, and consistency with widely accepted theories and background knowledge. If identity theory is the simplest theory, that's a significant point in its favor. However, by itself, simplicity is not conclusive. If simplicity were conclusive, then we should go with a view like solipsism and conclude that there is just one mind that exists. It's harder to think of a simpler theory. But given that there is more to consider than simplicity, we need not commit ourselves to solipsism simply because it is simple. Likewise, simplicity itself is not enough to establish that dualism is false and identity theory is true." I'll wrap it up there because I was under the impression we were having only 8-minute rebuttals, so that might just be my misunderstanding. But I'll leave it there and turn it over to Leo.
Not a problem at all. Leo, reset the timer. And we're ready for your rebuttal on your first word.
Yeah, I thought it was 8 minutes too, so I probably won't even take 8 minutes. Just a few thoughts naturally on David's argument. With respect to his first argument, I can actually grant premise one. I think that conceivability can be a guide to what I call broad logical possibility, because I take some things being broadly logically possible to just mean that it is conceivable. So I don't think I've got a problem. What the fuck did I just do? I don't think I've got a problem granting that premise. I like that David mentioned parring an argument, because it seems that we both had that in mind. At least as I was understanding his first argument, I believe that was the modal argument. I think that could be parred by just switching physicalism and substance dualism in that argument. And then I don't think that we're at any other place than we would be if say, David had presented, say, a modal ontological argument, and then I decided to par that with a reverse modal ontological argument. And at that point, I think that I would, as I would in both of those instances, would just appeal to other reasons for why the parred argument is stronger than the original one. So with respect to that argument, I guess that's really all I have to say there. With respect to realism, which relates to his second argument, I don't know if I would call myself a direct realist or an indirect realist. I'm not really sure how to. I don't know if there is some well-defined view for how I look at it. I think we do directly perceive reality, but I don't think that rules out there being sort of, I don't like the term mental pictures, just because I think that kind of front loads a lot onto that from psychology. But I don't think that us directly experiencing the world doesn't mean that there aren't features of our brain that factor into what it is and how it is that we're perceiving things. So I'm not, and I'm just sort of clarifying this just for the sake of clarifying my views on it. I'm not sure. I think I could probably grant some sort of indirect realism. I don't think that's ultimately going to be a threat to a physicalist perspective. With respect to this argument, I myself am not motivated to accept premise one, at least not immediately. I would need to see probably some sort of external argument for that. It also, I think, when David was quoting, I can't remember the author's name, but quoted from a book, it seems to me that all that's being described there is something like perhaps qualia, and then sort of taking qualia to be something separate from the physical. I'm not sure what qualia is. I'm not sure. And naturally, David, at least I didn't hear him directly use the word qualia, but I'm not sure what qualia is supposed to be. I'm not sure what it's supposed to add to the picture. I don't know if it adds anything meaningful. I'm not saying that it can't be a defined term, just that I don't know what it's adding to the picture. This is a view that's sort of related to something that I believe it's Pete Mandic has developed, known as qualia quietism. So that's probably something I would lean more toward. Some of the arguments or points that he gave in favor of this argument, one that immediately came to my mind was this lag time argument, and then some other ones were these like illusory perceptive effects that occur, like you might cite the the parallax. If you hold your finger out in front of you and blink your eyes back and forth, it seems that your finger is moving, but your finger isn't physically moving. I don't see how these are immediately a threat to physicalism. I think that a lot of these, the illusory perceptive effects, like when you stick a pencil in water and it looks like the pencil's separated itself, or parallax effects, I think that these are explained in virtue of a variety of physical states of affairs and physical relations. So I don't think that those are going to be any sort of immediate threat to physicalism. A point that I wanted to make, and it's at best tangential to the argument, but with respect to this lag time argument, I don't take the past to be non-real. I take the past to be as real as the present, to be as real as the future, as a result of my particular model of what time is. Again, just a tangential point that's one of the primary objections I would raise to some sort of point like that, is that, well, I don't think the past is something non-real. I think it is real. We're just not extended through it to be experiencing it. And then the last one was, I can't remember the name of the argument, but I know it had to do with this idea of fallibilism, and that we have, that we know certain things infallibly, which I think I'm willing to grant. I think that I infallibly know that 2 + 2 = 4. I think that I infallibly know that bachelors are unmarried men. But those are just, I know those infallibly because it's just what those things are defined as. They're analytic truths, as the philosophers will say. They're just true by definition. If what we mean by bachelor is an unmarried man, then when I say a bachelor is an unmarried man, all I'm saying is that an unmarried man is an unmarried man. And at that point, it's just tautological. But I would wonder how specifically fallible is being defined here. To say that I know something infallibly, if that means, and I'm not saying that this is what Dave is saying that it means, but if what that means is that there is no possible world, to say that I infallibly know P is just to say that there's no possible world in which P could be false, or I could be wrong about P. I'm not sure I would accept that definition of infallible, at least not with respect to most things that we know. Maybe there's some things that might fall under that definition of infallibility. But I also don't take knowledge to be something that's like some non-physical thing in the world. To me, knowledge is not a thing in the world. I'm a nominalist. Most that are physicalists are probably going to lean towards some sort of nominalism, which is just the idea that concepts like truth, like knowledge, these mental concepts that humans come up with, are not things in the world. They're not things in and of themselves, but are just merely concepts contained in what produces our thoughts. That's a particular view known as conceptualism, which is a nominalist view. That's probably what I hold to. So, and I'm not sure if I agree that justification requires some level of infallibility. I don't think most people I know, at least in philosophy, as in professional philosophers, would agree with that. I think fallibilism is a pretty popular view amongst relevant professional philosophers. Not that that makes the view correct or anything of that sort, but just that it shows that that's, I mean, I would think that it's hard to argue that a view is, well, incoherent if there's a bunch of professionals who hold to it. So I don't think that if I granted that there is nothing that can be known infallibly, that would be a threat to justification. I think that's all I have to say for right now. I think we can get into more of this in the opening discussion. I think I'll just leave it there.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Leo. And if you two are ready to go, we're going to jump into the open conversation. All right. Make sure we got our screen all set up. Good to go. And whoever would like to grab the ball first and try to take it to the hole, let's start
I
the
just
timer.
finished speaking, so I'll let David have the first word
Okay,
here.
I'll start the timer on your first word.
All right, yeah, I do have a few lines of questioning I'd like to go down with you, Leo, if possible. And I don't want to hog all the time, so if you want to take a break after the first line and you want to press me on some stuff or whatever, I think that's fair. But is it cool with you if I start my first line of questioning?
Sure.
Okay, perfect. So there may seem to be a lot of build-up to my ultimate question here, but I promise that all the questions I'm about to ask you are leading somewhere. So in your recent debate with Jim Bob, you accepted a JTB plus analysis of knowledge, meaning that you agree that knowledge minimally requires justification, truth, and belief. You still accept JTB plus?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. And so you think that our beliefs can be true or false?
Yeah.
Would you take beliefs to be a species of thought?
I guess so, yeah.
Okay. So in your recent debate with Jim Bob, you denied that thoughts exist as real concrete entities. You still hold that position?
Well, I suppose what I was saying there is that, like, concepts, some people word it as the content of our thoughts is not real. I would argue that what thoughts are themselves is just going to be some sort of neurophysiological effects or results or processes, what have you, functions, whatever word one wants to use, occurring across the brain.
Okay, but do you think that there is like a concrete thing that is a thought?
I guess in some sense, the concrete thing would just be whatever particular relations or processes furnish that thought in the brain.
Okay, well, then maybe my next question won't be admissible here, but what I had gotten from that was that you were saying that thoughts, don't exist. So I was going to ask if you agree that thoughts can be true or false, but deny that thoughts exist. Like, how is it that a non-existent thing can bear properties like truth and falsehood? Because seemingly existing is a prerequisite for bearing any properties at all.
I think that when philosophers of language say that, like, propositions have the property of, like, truth aptness, I don't take that to be a property in the sense that the koozie holding my beer can has the property of being blue. It's not some sort of physical property applying to an object extended to the world. I would just take that to be some sort of feature of the linguistic systems that we have for communicating.
So then you're saying that there's not actually a thing that is true or false?
I mean, a thing in the world, no.
Well, what do we mean by in the world, though? Because you used this term a lot with Jim Bob, and I have to admit, I wasn't sure what you were talking about when you're saying in the world. Are you talking about in the physical world, or are you saying in reality?
Yeah. Well, for me, I take the physical world to be reality. So I would say, yeah, it's not. Propositions are not things that are extended through space-time. They don't have any mass energy momentum.
I agree, but I still say that they exist. I just say that they exist as immaterial mental objects. But seemingly, you can't say that as a physicalist.
Well, I mean, I don't say that. I think that propositions are not like existent things. They're conceptual things.
Okay, well, so a commitment to the non-existence of thoughts, right, or propositions, seems to me to entail the non-existence of beliefs, right? But since we've already agreed that belief is a necessary component of knowledge, that also seems to entail that knowledge does not exist.
I don't think knowledge exists as a thing in the world.
Sorry, say that again?
I don't think knowledge exists as a thing in the world.
So can you
knowledge is how we describe how humans think about things, the process.
Why doesn't that commit you to global skepticism then?
What was that?
Why doesn't that commit you to global skepticism, which is just the thesis that knowledge does not exist? We don't actually know anything.
Well, I thought global skepticism was the idea that, like, we could be false about all of the things, or that we could be wrong about a lot of the things that we know.
That would be fallibilism, right? Skepticism is the idea that we don't know anything.
Well, I think we know things, but that doesn't
How
entail
can we
knowledge as an object.
exist?
Well, as a thing in the world, it doesn't. It's a concept.
Yeah, but
It exists as some sort of linguistic structure between human beings. I take these to just be linguistic features.
Okay, well, this might actually feed really nicely into one of my further lines of questioning. But do you want me to go down that one, or did you want to?
I'm okay with that. Yeah. If you want to ask some questions, I'm okay. We got 40 minutes, so ask away.
Okay, so then once again, pulling from your debate with Jim Bob, you said that communication relies on language, right? Similar to the point that you just made with me, and that the meaning behind language does not exist. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So have you ever had like the experience of wanting to write something, maybe say something to someone, but then like you thought better of it, so you didn't end up writing or saying whatever it was you were thinking?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So I want to ask, what do you think is going on there? Because I want to say that there's this real thing called a thought that never ended up being expressed in any language, since you neither wrote it down nor did you say it. But if, as you claim, there is no actual thought there that gives meaning to our language, I don't know how you make sense of the sort of experience I just described.
There were brain processes, and they did not result in me actually like using my vocal cords or moving my arm in my hand to write something on paper.
So then there is something behind sort of our language. It's not merely a linguistic thing, like you said.
Well, I think that linguistic things are just going to be intersubjective features of human brains.
So what do you mean by language then?
A means of communicating.
Right, but there's something behind it, right? Because well, maybe this will lean into a different question, right? Let me try this one instead. So suppose you're translating a piece of your writing, right, from English into French. What exactly do you think is going on there, right? Because as someone who believes that thoughts exist, I want to say that you're expressing the same thoughts, but in different words or in different language. But you deny that thoughts exist, and you deny that there's meaning behind our language. So it seems to me you have a hard time explaining what's going on in that case.
I think we're just taking some sort of concept and representing it with different sounds and symbols, potentially linguistic rules. I don't know how French. I don't speak French, so I don't know how French works. I presume it's similar to English. But
it could be any language for the purposes of this illustration. The point is, I'm trying to get that there's something behind language. Like language is not, it doesn't bottom out in language, in other words, because there is this thing that I want to call meaning that is independent of it's language independent. And I agree with you, by the way, that it is concepts, right? The problem is you also say concepts don't exist. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to get the explanation of what is that thing that lies behind language, and you're appealing to a further thing that you are also saying doesn't exist. So I feel like we haven't, explanation hasn't bottomed out. We're appealing to things that don't exist on top of things that don't exist on top of things that don't exist.
Oh, I think language is probably just going to be a result of brain processes, but not those that occur in one human, but those that occur in multiple humans across generations.
Does something seem wrong to you about identifying a thought or a concept as a process? Because it seems like a concept, right, can be instantiated, right? I have a concept of, say, my mother, right? That concept is instantiated. I have a concept of Santa Claus that is not instantiated. It doesn't seem like a process, though, can have something that's instantiated versus something that does not.
I mean, I think it is a process. The people that I've spoken to in neuroscience have said that's kind of what it is. We can take what somebody is thinking about and put it on a computer screen. If I'm thinking about the phrase, my Aunt Sally took me to lunch on Thursday, you can get a computer to literally write the phrase, my Aunt Sally took me to lunch on a Thursday. So I think that yeah, languages, concepts are all fundamentally just rooted in whatever sorts of processes, functions, structures, or relations occur across the human brain and across multiple brains.
Okay, they could be rooted in processes, but I'm asking, are they the same as those processes?
I mean, in the same sense that temperature is the same thing as mean molecular energy. I mean, I guess that just depends on whether somebody wants to take a reductive view or an emergence view. With respect to that, I would take more of an emergence view.
But that actually brings up a different line of questioning that I had here for you. Again, this is this topic of emergence, right? You compared it to the pieces of a puzzle, again, in your debate with Jim Dobb, right? And you suggested that concepts emerge from that. So given that you brought up, right, this issue of emergence, how does something emerge without existing?
How does something emerge without existing? Because it's
Mhm.
constituted in existing things.
But wait, what does this mean? To just say it's constituted by, it just seems to me to say it exists.
I mean, I think there's whether something is emergent and exists or not. I think just kind of depends on what we're talking about specifically.
Well, yeah, but to say it is something that's emergent, right? Or let me put this a different way. You think thoughts are processes, right?
Mm-hmm.
How can a process be true or false?
I don't think that they are. Processes are descriptive statements. They're not
So,
truth.
but then didn't you agree previously that thoughts could be true or false?
Well, thoughts, if they're propositions, can be, yeah.
So you do think processes can be true or false?
No. Propositions aren't processes. Propositions are a conceptual feature of the human mind.
Right, but so I'm saying is we have these thoughts, right? Propositional thoughts, and I want to say in some cases they're true. And so I ask you, what is that? And you say it's a process. So it seems to me you're saying a process can be true or false.
I don't think so. Processes are just descriptions of what's occurring. Propositions are some sort of convented conception that humans come up with.
So then you'd say our thoughts are not identical to brain processes.
I don't know if I would say identical. I mean, that just depends on how we're defining identity there.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, these are all just considerations that they seem like really easy to resolve on my view, right? They're like, are these mental entities, right? There are thoughts and they're true or false, right? I don't have to try to reduce it to a thought or say it's, emergent from a brain process, something like that. I guess these are just like various considerations. I admit I've never been really clear on what your views are here, because it seems like you're appealing to a bunch of stuff that you say doesn't exist.
Yeah, I think we can do that. I think we do that all the time. You mentioned Santa Claus. Santa Claus doesn't exist, but we could talk about Santa Claus and what he wears and what he looks like and what his job is, even though he doesn't exist. I think that we can talk about things that aren't real.
The question, though, is why are we able to do that, right? I want to say it's because there is an actual thing there, right? And that's the concept of Santa Claus, right? So what we're describing there is our concept of Santa Claus, and this concept is never instantiated. But again, in your debate with Jim Bob, you say, no, concepts don't exist. So I'm not clear on your view why it is that we can talk about things that don't exist, because concepts provide this really nice way for us to do that, right? Immaterial concepts give us these things that refer to things beyond themselves, right? Or maybe they don't, right? If they have no instantiations. But if you're going to say those things don't exist, I'm mystified as to how you think it's possible that we can talk about things that don't exist.
I would just argue through the variety of linguistic conventions that humans have developed, the signs, symbols, and sounds that we use.
But we've already established that those things depend on something more fundamental, right? That's why we're able to translate, for example, from one language to another, because whatever it is that we're translating, it's independent of our languages. And I'm saying that thing is our thoughts or our concepts. These things are more basic than our linguistic conventions, because those are the things that we're able to express through multiple linguistic conventions. Do you see that point?
Yeah, I would just call those a reference. So I can say tree and then I can say tree Frenchly. I don't know how to say tree in French. The referent is there. There's a tree there, or let me pick something that's a little bit more definitive. The Eiffel Tower. I can talk about the Eiffel Tower in English, in French, and Chinese because there is an Eiffel Tower there. So,
what about something without a referent, though, right? What about Santa Claus? In English, I can say Santa Claus, right? In German, I can say the Weihnachtsmann, right?
I think Santa Claus does have a referent. A man who wears a red suit and lives at the North Pole.
Sorry,
I think the referent.
What I mean by referent here is I mean instantiation, right? There is no instantiation.
I don't mean that.
Okay, so
I mean what is referred to by referent.
Right, but when we talk about Santa Claus, right, I think we're talking, just about our concept because it has no instantiation, if we want to say instead of referent.
Yeah, Santa Claus isn't physical, but I think there's something there that's being referred to when we talk about Santa Claus.
So do I, but I say it's a concept. You say that doesn't exist. So what is it?
I say it's a concept too. It's just concepts aren't things in the world.
Okay, so then that can't be what we're talking about, right? Because it doesn't exist.
Why not?
Because you can't be successfully referring to something that doesn't exist.
But we do that all the time, though.
No, in my view, again, remember what we're referring to is a concept. We're referring to an existing thing called a concept. You say, well, we do that all the time. I'm saying, yes, on my view explains how we can. I'm not seeing on your view how this is possible. Saying we do it all the time is not telling me how it would be possible if what you're telling me is true. Do you see that?
I mean, sort of. I guess I'm just confused. I mean, I don't take nominalism to be, that controversial of a view. It is a plurality view, and not by much. But yeah, there are just reference for things. Those things don't have to be in the world, and we can still refer to them. Because we usually, like Santa Claus is defined by a bunch of features of things that are in the world. Put together, that the collection of those things is not a thing in the world. There isn't a man who wears a red suit, who lives at the North Pole, who has an army of elves, who I guess, I mean, I hope they got a union or something. I just want to make that clear. But with an army of elves that build a bunch of toys for kids and surprisingly only appears to deliver them to the Western world. But elves are also going to be a reference. Take a human, make it smaller, or, well, whether or not they're shorter depends on the fantasy that you're referring to, but give it pointy ears. So I think that when we start talking about these non-existent reference, like Santa Claus or something like that, all we're doing is taking a bunch of existing concepts and putting them together into something that, as a collection, doesn't exist.
You can't take existing concepts, though, because you don't believe in concepts.
I mean, I believe in concepts. I just don't think they're things in the world.
You repeatedly, well, what does it mean to say I believe in it? Is that not to say I believe it exists?
No. To say that I think that it can, oh, of course, here we go with the camera. I think that it's something that can be referred to.
Right, but what are you referencing? How, in other words, how can you successfully refer to that which does not exist, right? Because reference is a type of relation, and relation requires relata. But you're saying one of the relata doesn't actually exist. So, like, I don't know how we're having a successful, like, relation of and we can move on from this. I'm saying this is something I don't understand about your view, because it seems like you're saying, oh, well, concepts are doing these work in my view. And I agree with you, by the way. I'm also a conceptualist and nominalist. It's just I can, because I think concepts are actual concrete immaterial things.
Wait. So you're a nominalist.
Mm-hmm. By which I mean there's no abstract.
So do you take concepts to be abstract or concrete?
Concepts I take to be concrete mental entities.
Okay. I was a little confused there, so I just needed to make sure that I was understanding what you were saying.
No, I do think they're immaterial, but I don't think they're acausal. So I don't think they're like platonic or something like that.
Yep. Yeah, and I take concepts just to be abstract, and I take abstract to not exist. I don't really see how it's problematic.
Because something that doesn't exist, I don't think can be doing work in your ontology.
Well, I mean, I think that depends on what we mean by doing work. Obviously, not doing work in any physical sense of the term, but
imagine if you asked me, like, I believe that Jesus rose from the dead, right? And you're like, well, how did that happen? I say God did it. You're like, oh, so you think God exists? No, I don't believe God exists. But he raised Jesus from the dead. It feels to me like that's what you're doing. You're right. I'm like, how do you explain this stuff? You say concepts. Oh, so you think concepts exist? No, concepts don't exist. Then, like, we're back to the original question of how do they do this work in your ontology if they don't exist? Just like, how could I be using God to explain, the resurrection of Jesus if I don't believe in God?
Well, but I think the problem there is that God would be supposed to be some sort of concrete entity engaging concretely with the world. Mm-hmm. I don't take concepts to be concrete, so I don't know what it would mean for them to do work.
Yeah, I think that is the problem. But we've probably beat this horse to death. Why don't we move on? I do want to give you an opportunity to press me on some stuff, if you have anything you want to press me on.
There was, you had mentioned something about being, I want to make sure I get this right, extended through space but not located in space? Or did I get that backwards, perhaps?
Located in space but not extended in space.
What does it mean for something to be located in space if it isn't extended through it?
I mean, we kind of have an idea of this in science of what like point-like objects, right? That are maybe supposed to be like located, but they're not voluminous. So like arguably they don't have extension. Not that they necessarily exist, but from what I understand, like point-like objects are theoretically an example of this. It's kind of hard to get like a grapple on what exactly it means. And if you'll recall, I said I don't necessarily take this view myself when it comes to the pairing problem. But, philosophers like Brandon Rickabaugh, J.P. Moreland do. And I don't see any like straightforward incoherence in it.
Yeah, I don't think I necessarily would say that there's incoherence there. With respect to the idea of like some point-like particles, that's generally more a convention that physicists use. Particles are technically always waves. It's just that waviness, for lack of a better word, can be reduced such that we can make meaningful statements in an almost definitive sense. But at least, and again, you said you're not necessarily committed to this as a sort of view. So I don't want to press you too hard on something that you're obviously not, strongly committed to. But I would say that I think particles are extended through space because, at least as far as we can tell, it just in virtue of the fact that I take quantum fields to be physically real and particles to be particular states of quantum fields, and quantum fields are extended through space. I don't know if there's anything you want to say before I ask another question.
I'd say that maybe points was a bad example. I thought it might resonate with you because I know you're very much a science guy. And so that's kind of an analogy that I've seen used there. Like if you think that the concept of a point is at least intelligible, then maybe you would accept that, a soul being spatially located without being extended is also intelligible. But if, it doesn't have the intended effect, don't take it too seriously.
What was the other question I wanted to ask? Do you have any questions for me while I consider? What's that?
Oh, I have a ton.
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to ask one question. It left my mind. It'll come back in like 30 seconds.
Okay. Well, yeah, feel free to bring that when it comes up. But I do want to press you a little bit on the argument from certainty. So you said you tend to agree that you do think that you have infallible knowledge in some cases, correct?
Yeah, I think there's at least some things that I know infallibly.
Okay. So do you deny that knowledge of physical objects is based on sense perception?
I think it depends on the extent of what we mean. So if by sense perception you mean like the strict perceptive senses of the human body, no. But if you extend that out to sense perception can include like telescopes and microscopes and particle colliders, then yes. So it just depends on the scope of what sense perception, ranges over as a concept.
Well, telescopes and microscopes, and again, you're the science guy here, so you might understand this better than me, but ultimately, like, this is still depending, like, ineliminably on visual perception, right? Yeah. So
in that sense, then I would say yes, that depends on sense perception.
Okay. So then are you disagreeing with me that sensory perception is always fallible?
I think sense perception is probably always fallible.
Then how is it that you could have infallible knowledge if you agree with me that all of our knowledge of physical objects is based on sense perception and sense perception is always fallible? That is just going to seem to entail that all of our knowledge is fallible.
Well, I don't know if all of our knowledge it comes from sense perception. I don't know if I would say that I'm an empiricist.
What's the other way of knowing that something exists?
Deductively.
So,
or knowing that something exists. I mean, perhaps there's deductive ways to do that, but I think that we can know things analytically, and that doesn't have anything to do. Like that bachelors are unmarried men. I know that. I know it infallibly, and I do not know that through any sense perception.
So then you don't agree that all of our knowledge is based on sensory perception?
All of our knowledge? No. All of our knowledge about physical stuff? Probably.
So then you would agree that analytic truths are not physical?
Well, I don't think truth is physical, so no.
Okay. So that seems to generate the conclusion then that there are some immaterial things, namely those items that we know with certainty.
I mean, I don't think truth is immaterial because I don't think truth is a thing in the world. I don't think it's got like properties and not extended to anything. It's just
Then
another concept that humans.
How can you know
come
it
up
if
with.
it doesn't exist?
Because that's what knowledge is defined as.
Yeah, but again, if it doesn't exist, then nothing meets that definition, right?
Well, I think there are things that do. I think concepts do, of course.
You don't think concepts exist.
So I don't think something has to exist to be talked about or to be.
I know, but it does have to exist in order to bear properties like truth or falsehood.
But I don't think these things do have properties. Not at least in the strict sense of what property.
So there is no property.
So I'm a bundle theorist when it comes to like properties and mereology. So I don't think that like abstracta have properties.
Okay, but you're saying that there is nothing then that has the property of truth.
I mean, in like some colloquial sense, propositions can bear truth as a property, but that's not a property in the strict sense of a property, like that this lighter is blue. So I think we can use that language, but it's not being used strictly.
Yeah, I'm not at all clear on what you're saying, right? You think that you seem to agree that our knowledge of physical objects is based on sensory perception. You agree sensory perception is always fallible. So it seems like that if you think that there's something that we know infallibly, like an analytic truth, then it just seems to trivially follow that that is not a physical thing. I mean,
I would agree. I don't think things that aren't in the world can't be physical.
Yeah, but it also seems like they can't be known.
I don't see why.
Because knowledge is factive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if there's no fact, right, there's no thing there, right, to be known, then like how can you have knowledge of it? It seems like you can't, right? In order to know something, in order for it to be true, right, there has to be this correspondence relation. But you want to say one of the relata, and that relation doesn't exist, and so it seems like the relation can't obtain.
I don't know if I would grant that truth is furnished by correspondence. I don't hold to a correspondence theory of truth.
Okay, you did accept that in our last debate, but I understand.
I may.
Yeah, it's been 3 years, so like we're allowed to change our views. I'm not going to hold you to what you said 3 years ago. But okay, it'd probably be interesting then to discuss at some point what exactly you mean by that. Have you thought of your question yet, or do you want to dig in a little on the motor?
To be honest, I have not. It'll come to me at some point. I'll hear something and it'll trigger it. It was, I think, tangentially related to the question that I had about like spatial extension versus location, and I'm just blanking on what it was naturally.
Fair enough. Okay. You said that you think you can reverse the modal argument. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I think if you want to say that physicalism is conceivable, then, right, you'd have to substitute that for the second premise, right, where I said that disembodied existence is conceivable. You'd have to swap that and say that, essentially embodied existence is conceivable or something like that.
Yes.
What exactly am I supposed to be conceiving of in that scenario? Like, what is a non-actual scenario where I'm an essentially embodied agent?
How do you mean?
Well, so that's what I'm appealing to, right? Is that you agree conceivability entails possibility. And you are saying, and I'm able to give you like a ton of examples, right, where disembodied existence is conceivable, right? Descartes' closest demon, the Matrix,
Pinocchio, who doesn't have a brain or anything like that. So,
right. So, are you saying that is a conceivable scenario where you're saying Pinocchio is an example where we have a conceivable scenario, like a non-actual scenario of essentially like embodied existence?
I mean, I think. So are you asking me, like, is it in what world is it conceivable that we're purely physical?
Yeah, I'm saying, can you give a non-actual scenario, sort of like I'm giving, to motivate the idea that it's conceivable that we are non-physical? Can you do something similar to that to indicate?
Yeah, I can just say that there exists a world where there's physical stuff, like the actual world, and that that there are minded agents in that world, and their minds are furnished entirely by physical processes.
That just sounds
what would be. impossible.
That's like a description, though, of what you think the actual world is, right? That's not a non-actual scenario.
Well, I mean, on your view, it would be a non-actual scenario, wouldn't it? Unless you think that somehow you can't be a mind and be physical.
Yeah, I agree it's non-actual, and I also don't think I can conceive of it, right? Because there's not like, I don't think that there are any obvious. This is my big problem, right? With claiming you can reverse modal arguments, and I have a second one I'd like to get to, but like I just don't think we have comparable reasons for accepting the possibility premise in both cases. There's a ton of thought experiments that the dualist can appeal to that shows that disembodied existence is conceivable. The physicalist has none, as far as I can see. I've never heard a physicalist try to give any sort of conceivable, non-actual scenario where a person is essentially embodied. Never heard of it.
Well, I would just say, and I think probably, honestly, a lot of philosophers would probably say the actual world.
Yeah, but that's not a non-actual scenario.
Sure, but it's still a conceivable world. The actual world is definitionally a conceivable world.
But I think
because in order to be actual, you have to be conceivable.
I think dualism is true in the actual world, right? So you can't say that the actual world is demonstrating the point without begging the question that we are.
Are you saying that physicalism is impossible?
Yes, and that's actually leading to the second point that I would.
What would be the contradiction?
Perfect. Yes. So the contradiction is entailed if you accept premise one, right? So if you accept that conceivability entails possibility, you accept that we are necessarily, embodied, and yet you would say that a necessarily embodied person can conceive of their own disembodiment, right? But if
I don't know if I would say we're necessarily embodied. I think we are embodied. I don't know if it's the case that we're embodied across all possible worlds.
Then you'd be challenging a different premise in my argument, right? You'd be challenging the claim. You'd basically be you'd be challenging the thesis of trans-world identity. Do you disagree with trans-world identity?
What exactly is that?
So basically, it's the idea that consider there's two possible worlds, right? World A and World B. World A, exclusively physical objects exist in that world. World B, no physical objects whatsoever. Like, say God exists in that world and souls and abstract objects, but there's no physical stuff in world B. Is there anything that's the same in both of these two worlds? If you say no, that you couldn't have something that exists in both of these worlds, then you accept trans-world identity. You accept that something can't be immaterial in one world, material in the other, and still be the same thing.
I think I'm struggling to understand this concept. If something is one way in one world, then it can't be any other way in any other world and still be the same thing.
Yeah, or at least to say it's composition, right? It can't be material in one world, immaterial in the other, and still be the same thing.
Why not?
I mean, it seems obvious to me, right? Like if you're, I want to say there's nothing that's the same in a world with only physical objects and a world with, no objects. If you want to push back on
those worlds aren't identical, but I think that like, what if there was a world where water isn't H2O, but it's still water?
I'm not seeing what is the point there.
That you can have something that's compositionally different, but it's still the same thing.
Well, it's not the same thing, right?
But what if it was?
Well,
I don't see.
I believe in trans-world identity, right? I don't think it could be. Like, I don't know what we're even talking about at that point.
Well, we would be talking about water. In one world, it's H2O. In another world, it's PQW.
Yeah, and I say we're just not talking about the same thing in both worlds. You might be using the same word, but you have a different definition in both cases, so you're not talking about the same thing.
Well, a clear liquid that doesn't have a taste, a colorless, tasteless liquid that hydrates.
You might have the same.
I would think that we are talking about the same thing then.
Well, it depends. Are you talking about the manifest properties, or are you talking about the underlying chemical composition, right? Because you agree.
I should clarify. Do you think physicalism is logically impossible?
Given the conceivability criterion and that we are able to conceive of our own disembodied existence, yes, I think physicalism is logically impossible.
I guess I don't see how conceiving of something means that it's false in the actual world.
Well, so conceiving of something means it's possible, right?
Yeah, that just means that I can imagine it.
Okay, so if
And I
conceivability...
can't imagine minds being non-physical, but I don't think that says anything about whether they are or aren't.
If conceivability entails, right, conceivability entails possibility, we're going to say that a being, by hypothesis, is necessarily embodied, then if he can conceive of his own disembodied existence, that entails...
If it's necessarily embodied, then that would just entail that across all possible worlds it's embodied. That's what the necessity operator does.
Precisely.
But one can just say that physicalism isn't necessarily true.
And then in that case, you're challenging trans-world identity at that point.
I guess I just don't see how it follows that saying physicalism isn't necessarily true somehow means that I can't conceive of a world where physicalism is false.
It's not saying physicalism is necessarily true. It's saying that a physical object is necessarily a physical object, right?
Of course.
In a world with no physical things, it's not a physical object.
Sure.
Okay, then it seems like you would accept trans-world identity.
Yeah, I mean, if all that means is that something can't be like... You can't have something defined as X can't be X and not X, right? Then of course that's just going to be definitional.
Okay, so if we accept that that like is the case, right, that my mind is a physical object, right? If we say my mind is a physical object or a set of processes or whatever, then it cannot possibly exist in a world where there are no physical things, because we've agreed physical objects are necessarily physical objects. So you can't put them in another world where there are no physical things and still have the mind.
Sure. Yeah, you can't have a world where there are electrons but no physical things.
Yeah, so you can't have a world where if my mind is a physical object, it cannot exist in an immaterial world.
Yeah,
but now what you're saying, what's that?
Sorry, go ahead.
So if you agree, right, that this mind, let's say it's my own mind, you say that it is a physical object, but it's able to conceive of itself in a disembodied state, right, in a state with no physical stuff, and you accept that conceivability entails possibility, what you're saying is that it is both possible and impossible that this mind is material, right? So that's the contradiction. That's your P and R.
I guess I don't think that it's both possible and impossible. I think it's possible that minds could be physical. I think it's possible that they could be non-physical, but I think it's actual that they're physical and non-actual that they're non-physical.
Right. The problem with that, though, is you think my mind is physical, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you think that a physical object is a physical, like it's necessarily a physical object. It can't exist in a world of no physical things.
I mean, yeah, actually, minds cannot exist in a world with non-physical stuff, but that doesn't say anything about whether I can conceive of that being the case. And me conceiving of different doesn't say anything about what the possibility doesn't tell us anything about what the way the world actually is. I mean, unless maybe you're a modal realist and you think that like all possible worlds are real in some sense.
In some cases, it does, right? If we are saying that, well, because possibilities are grounded in actualities, there are cases where what's possible can't. The point here is that you've accepted, right, premise one of the modal argument. You've accepted that whatever's conceivable is possible. So if you're accepting that my mind, which we're saying is necessarily physical, we're saying it cannot possibly exist in a world where no physical things exist. But I can conceive of it existing in that world. And if you accept the first premise, therefore it's possible for it to exist in that world.
It seems all that establishes is that physicalism is not necessarily true, that the mind is not necessarily physical. But I don't need the mind to be physical in any necessary sense to argue that the mind is physical.
So then you'd be rejecting trans-world identity.
I'm still not seeing how.
Because you're saying that the mind, if it's not necessarily physical, right? You're saying that the same mind could exist in a world of only physical objects and a world of no physical objects. And you're saying the same mind could exist in both worlds.
Sure.
That
doesn't tell me about which world is actual.
That's a denial of trans-world identity.
Okay.
Okay, so you think that in a world, right, where there's only physical objects, in a world where there's no physical objects, something could be the same in both of these worlds.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's broadly logically possible.
I think
don't know if that would be like nomologically possible, but that's a completely different modal scope. So
right. Yeah. No, I'm keeping it restricted to logical possibility. But yeah, I think it's like plainly absurd to say that the same thing exists in world A and world B in that case.
30 seconds.
But I mean, I feel like that maybe I'm off base here, and I might be, but I feel like that might depend on how one's defining identity. And I don't know. I don't think identity is like a property of objects. I think identity is something humans slap on to stuff because we can talk about it. But I don't think identity is like. And again, this is probably not that important to the argument, but.
All right. Well, I think we are running out of time here.
All right.
So, yeah.
No, it was perfect. Natural, very natural.
Damn, it's 40 minutes
really,
already.
Really good. 40
Why
minutes
does 40
already?
minutes ever go that quickly when I'm at work?
It always goes faster when you're doing what you love.
It does. I swear it does.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. That was actually quite interesting. I was sitting here taking notes myself over here. I was like this. Okay, this is some good stuff here. But it is time for the closing statements. Each of you has 5 minutes. So I believe it will be Dave that we will start with, who will have the 5 minutes, and then we will close out with Leo.
All right.
And I've reset the timer. And Dave, on your first word, we will start.
Okay. Yeah. I probably won't need the full 5 minutes. I don't typically prepare closing statements. I'll just go through some final thoughts here. I think we kind of hit on the modal argument. We didn't really have a chance to hit at all on my second argument from indirect realism, which is too bad, but, we just can't hit everything in 40 minutes. So we did cover a lot of ground there. He said that he thinks he could grant indirect realism, which again, indirect realism kind of entails that there are these mental images. So given physicalism, I think the question for Leo would be like, where are these, mental images in the physical world, right? We can't like cut into your mind, right? Or scan your brain and sort of find these mental images in there. And that's because these are like private things, right? We all kind of learned in grade school, right? That we could think something funny about our teacher, right? And that they wouldn't be able to know it, right? We could imagine them in all kinds of silly ways. And I think that this just supports that like these sense data are private sorts of things. So it'd be interesting to hear if Leo thinks he can accept that these sorts of things exist, sort of where he thinks that they are in the physical world. He said he doesn't like the term mental images. And I would just like, what do you do with the Hermann grid illusion, right? I put the picture up there before. You have these sort of black spots that appear to be on there, right? It seems like mental image is a really good descriptor of those things, but they're not present in the physical stimulus, right? This is something that the mind is creating, right? And I'm calling that sense data. And we can't find those things in the physical world, right? The little dots that we see, they are not there on the Hermann grid illusion, right? They're not present in the physical stimulus, yet we still see them. And so I think, mental image is the perfect descriptor for these sorts of things. Moreover, I think this entails that the sense data theory is true, and that this is just going to, entail that there are immaterial mental entities known as sense data. I hit, I think, all the major points I wanted to, but I'll just close by saying I really have liked my debates with Leo in the past. This is, of course, our second live debate, but, we've had a whole lot of friendly banter on Facebook over the past couple of years. Leo, I think, is one of the better YouTube counter apologists because he's smart. He knows his stuff in the area of science in particular. I certainly know better than to, go toe-to-toe with him on the Kalam cosmological argument or something like that. And so I do appreciate Leo for being a respectful interlocutor, someone who I think tries to take these issues seriously. And hopefully we can have another exchange someday because I do just enjoy them that much. That's really all I got on that. So again, thanks for having the debate, Leo. Thank you for everyone here. Are we calling it Skeptic Haven? Or are we calling it the Thought Experiment? Either way, thank you for putting this together and giving me the opportunity to cross swords with Leo again.
Excellent. Thank you. And Leo, we got it restarted. So whenever you're ready, your 5 minutes on your first word.
I like that cross swords reference, given how much you know about the Crusades and things like that. I like that a lot. I really agree with David on the point that our discussions have always been, I think, well-mannered. Even, if we throw some playful banter out there, it's still well-mannered. I think we know each other relatively well enough that we can do things like that. And these discussions are always nice. When you're talking with people who aren't Jim Bob, who actually have some understanding of the ideas that are being talked about, it just makes for better discussion. Unfortunately, we didn't dig too much into some of the questions I had concerning causal interaction and whatnot, and just getting some of David's views on that. But as he's already pointed out, you can't touch on everything, and he had some interesting points and interesting questions he was raising that I kind of wanted to hear him out and answer some of the things that he wanted to raise. He mentioned something in his closing statement there. I don't remember what it was word for word, but something about what are these mental representations? They don't seem to be anything in the brain. On my view, I think they are. When we look at these sorts of optical illusions, for the most part, at least, cognitive scientists do understand what's going on in the brain, what parts of the brain are involved, and why the brain is filling in information that isn't actually there as a result of the way that the brain is physically structured. At the end of the day, I just take that to be a point in favor of physicalism, that it's a result of the physical structures in the brain, the processes occurring across the brain that account for why it is that the brain fills in information in optical illusions that isn't really there. There is a sense in which we can sort of peer into somebody's mind. Again, the language that is used can be a bit flowery as compared to like the technical. Like if you were a graduate student in neuroscience sitting down with an expert, the way that they would explain it to you versus somebody like one of us plebes that doesn't know anything about that. But we can use computers to sort of decipher what it is people are thinking, reconstruct the kinds of images. It's rudimentary, but we can reconstruct images and linguistic phrases that people are thinking. So there is a sense in which we can sort of peer into a person's mind and see what it is that they're thinking about, what it is that they have on their mind, which I think lends credence to the idea that thoughts are some sort of physical process occurring across the brain, furnished by relation and communication across its multiple parts. I don't think consciousness is like in a part of the brain. I think that consciousness is like digestion or running. Digestion is what the gut does. It's not in the stomach or in the large intestine or in the small intestine. All of the parts working together are what digestion is. Running isn't in your pinky toe. It's not in your calf. It's not in one of the four muscles of your quadriceps. It's in what the legs are doing. So I take a very processual view with respect not just to my understanding of consciousness, but my understanding of the physical world altogether. That's why I don't like mental states, physical states, quantum states. I don't like this language because the world doesn't evolve on a state by state basis as if there's a bunch of individual moments and there's like a window that moves through them in some concatenated manner. Process metaphysics comes up here. I think that factors into my view. So with that being said, I encourage people to look into things like substance dualism and things like physicalism, but also things like idealism or panpsychism. I can't really think of any other unique views on the mind, but just because these are interesting views. I think substance dualism is interesting. I don't think it's true, but I think it is interesting to consider. I think that maybe there are some things that can be explained better under substance dualism than physicalism, but I think at the end of the day, physicalism is likely to win out. I think it's got a better explanatory picture. I just now remembered the question I wanted to ask David, but it's too bad because we're in the closing statements. But I think it's just, I think it's got a bit more, I think
30
a
seconds.
bit more explanatory power, explanatory scope. I think it fits better with our accepted models of the world and trying to explain how the world works. I would say I think physicalism makes more sense, but I'm a physicalist and I've got a variety of other priors that inform physicalism that make it make more sense to me. David obviously is not going to agree with that, so I'm not going to make that point, and I guess I'll just leave it there for now.
Okay. Thank you, Leo, for that closing.
I don't know how many questions we have. Gonna run to the bathroom quick. Got my headphones in. I'll be listening.
I also don't know what questions we have. I have the live chat pulled up, but I don't see any that are marked. So oh, here we go. Yay. Of course, it's a question for Leo. Of course it was. Let's see. Leo's not here, but he should be back here in just a moment. I think he said that he can hear us, though. So if I ask the question in a very, very dry academic way, he may be able to formulate an answer by the time he gets back here. So go ahead and bring up that question again, the one that's for Leo. Question for Leo. How does experience emerge from non-experiential matter without a correlation causation fallacy or category error? I really hope that's not the sound that I think it is. I think he should be back in just 1 second. Yeah, he could have started singing like Leslie Nielsen in The Naked Gun. Whoops.
There seemed like that in Liar Liar as well.
I know he's here.
Yes, I
Yes.
am back. What
so
am I
question-
singing? What's going on?
Question for you, Leo. How does experience, this is from the Mirror Point, how does experience emerge from non-experiential matter without a correlation causation fallacy or category error?
I'm not sure what a correlation causation fallacy is meant to be. Category error. I don't know what that would do. This just seems like that. Well, how do we get mind from non-mind stuff? The same way we get protons from things that aren't protons, the same way we get planets from things that aren't planets, the same way we get galaxies from things that aren't galaxies. Stars aren't galaxies, but stars make up galaxies. So this is the sort of the concept of emergence, at least as I express it, is that and David touched on this already, but I mean, if you imagine a puzzle, you put the pieces together and you get a picture of, say, a red barn or something like that. The picture of the red barn emerges from the pieces of the puzzle put together the right way. The red barn is not on any of the individual pieces of the puzzle. So the red barn emerges from the pieces of the puzzle. It emerges from non-red barn things. I don't understand what this objection is supposed to be getting at. Things come from things that they're not all the time. Like protons. Quarks are not protons, but what are protons made of? They're made of quarks. So it emerges, experience emerges from the perceptive apparatuses, the collection of that information, its processing, storage, and integration by all of the various parts of the brain. In fact, there's one part that we know that's extraordinarily important to that, the temporoparietal junction. We also know that this is part of the brain, and the disintegration of multisensory information at the temporoparietal junction is responsible for things like out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences and things of that sort. So, and again, I think that's a point in favor of physicalism, that we can map what parts of the brain are responsible for integrating perceptive information in a way that allows us to have a coherent picture of the world around us.
All right. From Wrote It No Less Name. Question for both of the interlocutors. Are pattern of things things, or are patterns of things things?
I have no idea what that question means.
Reading as are patterns of things. Let me see if I can if I may be able to say, are patterns of things things in and of themselves?
I feel like it might be more helpful if we had a concrete example here. Like, are we talking about like a pattern on like my shirt here, or are we talking about like a like series of like events that are kind of similar to one another, like a recurring cycle or something like that? Because like in the former case, I'm going to say yes, right? I think that the pattern on my shirt is a thing, and I don't think that like a pattern of events is a thing. So it's kind of an unclear question.
What was the question specifically again? Something about things? Oh, are patterns of things themselves things? I think it depends on what we mean by thing. That would be my first is, what do you mean by thing? If it's saying it's a pattern of something physical, itself physical, I mean, perhaps. I don't know if that's going to be true across the board. I think temperature is physical, but I also think temperature is an emergent process. I think it's a pattern that comes out of mean molecular energy. You don't have temperature until you have a bunch of stuff put together. Then you have temperature. An electron doesn't have a temperature, but the top of my table, that has a temperature. So I think it depends on what you mean by things. I also think, I personally don't, just because for simplicity's sake, don't make this distinction, but it is a distinction that exists in the literature between strong emergence and weak emergence. Strong emergence is the idea that when X emerges from Y, you're getting something entirely novel that cannot be accounted for in virtue of all of the parts of Y in and of themselves. It's sort of this novel thing that comes out of it. Whereas weak emergence says something like, if X emerges from Y, you can still account for X in terms of all of the parts and relations in Y, so to speak. And I think that I would probably take, as I think most who hold to an emergence view would take, as a weak emergence, but I tend to just say emergence and then define emergence as some sort of property, pattern, system, or structure that arises out of multiple parts, multiple lower order parts put together in the right way, that is not present in any of the multiple parts. And then I use the puzzle example as a way of sort of providing for the intuition of that. But the strong weak emergence is still a distinction that is made in the literature. Was that David Chalmers that originally did the strong versus weak? I think it was. Don't quote me on that, though. I don't read his literature. David Chalmers is wrong about a lot of things. And he's right about some other stuff too. So you got to give him credit where credit's due.
I probably think he's right about more than you do.
Yes, you probably do. I kind of talked on David Chalmers. I don't really, but I could, just because he's got some views that I don't fully agree with. But David Chalmers is an excellent philosopher.
It's so weird being a moderator for the first time because I have so many opinions on these things and I can't say any of them. But nonetheless, next question from the Mirror Point. Question for Dave. How does he solve the classic interaction problem?
Yeah, I sort of alluded to this in my rebuttal to Leo. Excuse me. But I tend to kind of deny that there is one. It's typically not even clear what the problem's supposed to be. It's usually just this series of questions that gets asked to the dualist about, well, how does the mind interact with the body, right? Because they're very different, which means that it's like impossible that they interact. It's improbable that they interact. Like, what is it about the fact that they're different that is supposed to like preclude causal interaction? My own view on this, right, is that there's just this direct relation of causation, and that you need that for any chain of causation if you don't want to say it goes on infinitely. When you get to the end of the chain of causation, there's going to be a direct causal relation there. And that's going to hold between, again, physical objects, and it's going to hold between mental and physical objects. That's, just kind of how causation works. I also think that a lot of times the physicalist is seeking like a mechanistic explanation for how this works. And I just kind of want to resist it. Again, I think of it, I don't see any need to posit anything more than a direct causal relation between the mind and body.
Can I provide some comments on that? Obviously, Dave should have the last word, but am I allowed to provide comments on that, or are we keeping comments strictly to who they were asked to?
I don't see why not. Yeah, if you have something to pause there, go ahead.
I think, and this might not do Dave any help to say this, but I think the question with respect to the interaction problem is, number one, is there an interaction between the physical stuff and then the non-physical stuff? And if so, what furnishes the interaction? And then with respect to causation, and I'm just sharing my views on this, so I can't obviously speak for all of the metaphysicians who focus on causation. I would say that I think a lot of them probably hold to something similar, just based off of the somewhat limited literature I've read. But I take causation, I don't think causation is probably fundamental to reality. So I don't think that there's just like some sort of fundamental brute causal relation between things. I think causal relations are going to be defined in terms of probably at least at like the very bottom of it, the way that fields couple to each other. And I don't think that's probably going to be causal. I think that's just going to be some sort of descriptive fact about the world. The view that I have is that that's just going to be some brutally contingent descriptive fact about the world. That's just that it is just the way the world is. Quantum fields couple to each other, and they do because they do, and that's where it ends. And then causation would be furnished in virtue of all of these couplings between the fields and the things that can sort of arise out of that. And if Dave has anything that he wants to say with that, I'll let him have the last word because the question was for him.
I was just going to say, presumably even you would agree, Leo, that like any causal chain, even if you don't think causation is fundamental, like causal chains terminate at some point, right? Like you don't think all causal chains are infinite. So there is a terminus. And
Yes.
at that terminus, I presume you're going to have to appeal to a direct causal relation at some point. Like eventually explanation comes to an end, right?
And might be, yes. But I think what causation will reduce to is not itself causal. So like the couplings between fields, I don't think is a causal relation. I think it's a relation. I don't know if I would call that causal.
But you are saying it's like a brute contingency, right? It just sort of is that.
Yeah. I mean, I can agree that I think causality will reduce to some, in my view at least, some brutally contingent, perhaps relation between structures or something like that.
So then I guess the question is, like, why don't you think that that's acceptable when it comes to mind-body interaction? Why can't we say this is just a direct causal relation? Like, what is the issue with that?
So I guess I would say what number one, what are the relata? How do we know that the relata are there? And what is the nature of the relation that they stand in? Causal or non-causal? And I just don't, for me, I haven't had a sufficient answer. Perhaps one exists and I just haven't heard it yet. You know, it's not so much that I'm saying it can't be the case as much as it is I have not personally been convinced by anything I have yet heard.
Yeah, I mean, and we don't have to go down. Obviously, like the relata there are going to be the mind and the body. And of course, the reason I think that they exist, I think the body exists because of, my sensory perception of it. And I think that the immaterial mind exists broadly for the sorts of reasons I laid out in my opening statement.
Yeah, I'll let you have the last word there again, since that was a question for you.
All right. See what our next question is. To both of you, did you move at all on your position on this at all?
I mean, I didn't, and I don't expect that, debates of this sort generally are going to move the speakers. Not to say that they can't, but generally they exist more so for the audience. Me and Leo, we shared our opening statements with each other beforehand. We're both, to some degree or another, conversant with the literature here. I don't think there were like any huge surprises for either of us.
I think I would agree with that. I'm not moved. But most of the time, debates, there's at least a couple of questions that I kind of ask myself about my view, and I think that that's important in these kinds of discussions. Is that if you walk away asking yourself questions, or maybe you're not convinced of your opponent's position, but maybe your views have shifted a little bit, and you're like, maybe I should lend a little bit more credence to this objection, or well, maybe this objection that I gave isn't as strong as I thought it was, and things like that. And I think that's generally, for me at least, what tends to come out of these level of debates.
Okay. Well, I can tell you it moved me. so nice to be a part of a constructive conversation for once.
Yes. I'm sure you've been starving for that, haven't you, J.O.?
I need some intellectualism. I do. Next question is, I think that this may be for both of you, or my gut says it's probably for Leo, but what do you mean by real? Mind dependent versus mind independent, or is it something else, or is something else included?
I don't know if it's strictly for me. I'd be curious to hear how David answers this question. But I would. So there's it's not a lot, but I think something is real if it exists, and I think it exists if it has being, and I think it has being if it's real. I think that I don't think that existence as a concept, that its meaning is given in virtue of other terms. I think it's sort of a semantic primitive, if you will. And at the end of the day, we control each other and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, I think everybody knows, all the way down to the first graders. If I said that trees exist, people know what I mean. If I said, this might not apply to first graders, but if I said Santa Claus doesn't exist, I think people know what I mean. I think that, and I not just what I mean, but anybody that said those, I think people would know what they mean. So generally speaking, and there's quite a bit of nuance to this, but I think that something is real if it's concrete. And I take, just for those that might not know, the difference between something that's concrete and something that's abstract in the literature. An entity is concrete if it stands in causal relations with things. Think of an electron. The reason that your light bulb glows is because of electrons. So clearly electrons stand in causal relations with things. Electrons are concrete. Abstracta, which is plural for abstractum, which is the singular for abstract things. Abstracta do not stand in causal relations. So think of the number 3. The number 3 doesn't cause anything to happen. It's an abstract entity, and that's sort of that divide there. So I take something to be, and again, there is plenty of nuance to this, but in some really general sort of maybe colloquial sense, I would say something is real if it's concrete, if it stands in causal relations.
I think I'd have a point of agreement with you, excuse me, when you say that it's kind of a conceptual primitive. Defining existence or being is kind of one of the hardest things you'll ever try to do.
Yep.
Sort of like trying to bite your own teeth. It's very difficult to do. This book here is called Being Qua Being by Panayat Buchvarov. It's probably the most impressive attempt that I've seen of a philosopher trying to pontificate for 300 pages about what it means for something to exist. But yeah, in the end, I think maybe the best way to do it is just by what's called ostension, namely what Leo did by sort of trotting out clear examples of things that exist and things that don't, and kind of hope people get the idea, right? And I think something was in there about mind dependent versus mind independent. I think, of course, that's an important distinction here, and sometimes we can use real versus not real to map onto that distinction. In fact, I think probably some of that confusion was coming out when me and Leo were sort of talking about things like thoughts and concepts. I don't know if Leo actually thinks these things don't exist in the sense of having no ontological status, or he just means he thinks they exist mind dependently. It's very difficult for me to tell. Honestly, just listening to his exchange with Jim Bob, and honestly, even in my interaction with him here, I'm still not sure what he's talking about. But a way I think of this is to show that there is a difference between something existing mind dependently and not existing at all, is take the difference between something that you can imagine, right, and something that nobody ever imagines, right? Somebody a scenario that no one ever imagines in any sense at all, it has no ontological status. That's probably the clearest way I can try to describe non-existence to you. But yeah, we've probably said enough on this.
All right. I think we have another one coming up here. Pretty sure there's another one, unless it was in the. Here we go. Yep, there it is. Question for David. What is the best response to the modal argument for substance dualism that you have heard from? This is AJ Stringfellow.
Yeah, that's a good
Name sounds
question,
familiar.
because I've been pretty routinely unimpressed with most of the objections to the modal argument. The one I struggle with the most is one Leo kind of tiptoed around a little bit, although I don't know that he like explicitly endorsed it. But it would be this idea of contingent physicalism that is defended by like Trenton Merricks, for example, and Andrew Bailey, where they actually do try to argue against, the thesis of trans-world identity. It's really hard to give like a clear argument for trans-world identity. It just seems so obviously true to me, right? If we've got a world of nothing but physical objects and a world of nothing but, absolutely no physical objects whatsoever, I just don't know how you can say that there is something that's the same in both of those worlds. I don't know what we're even talking about at that point. But yeah, I really can't. I don't have like a formal argument against, or rather in favor of formal trans world identity, rather. So, like in some ways, that's like rhetorically a vulnerable spot in the modal argument, because I don't have any way to defend a trans world identity other than that it like seems obvious and that the denial of it is unintelligible.
Okay. Next question for Leo. How can I know P if P does not exist?
I mean, I think we do that all the time. We know a bunch of things that aren't real. And I can make up a world where things travel faster than the speed of light, and I can say that I know that in this world things travel faster than the speed of light, because that's just the way I've described the world, even though nothing actually travels faster than the speed of light.
I think that kind of is maybe missing his point, though, because the substance dualist has an explanation for this, right? They say that this does exist in this mind-dependent way, right? It exists in your mind, the sort of world that you've created, for lack of a better word, in your mind. So the substance dualist has an explanation how you are knowing something without it being instantiated. I think the challenge that's being put to you is that seemingly that option is not open to the physicalist. So this is, a point in favor of dualism. That would be my interpretation of AJ's point there.
I guess I'm not sure that something's being instantiated is required for knowing it.
I'm not saying it does have. I'm not saying that like the concept has to be instantiated. I'm saying something has to exist, right? Which just is the uninstantiated concept.
I guess I don't see how strict existence is required for knowledge.
Yeah, I mean,
I can see why that's probably counterintuitive to most people, but I would just say that I don't think something's being counterintuitive necessitates that it's wrong, or not even necessarily necessitates, or implies that it's wrong.
But maybe it would put some pressure on you to give some like help us through that, right? Because it seems kind of, I mean, it's not that it just seems counterintuitive to me. It seems to me like like a definitional thing that in order to like bear properties, right, you have to exist. A non-existent thing doesn't do anything, including bear properties. So maybe just the point I'd give you as a bit of advice is like, maybe if you accept that that's counterintuitive, try to give like some sort of analysis or explanation of how it's possible.
Well, I think it's possible because I don't see what the contradiction is. And I think that if something has no defined contradiction, then it's possible.
It'd be easy to get a contradiction out of it, though. I mean, by, defining terms in such and such a way, right? Such as that, like, in order to bear properties, something has to, like, only existence can bear properties by definition, right? To bear properties, you have to be existent. So, like, now that's just going to be a definitional matter, right? You can reject that definition, but it does invite the question to, like, clarify to us what the hell you're talking about. How are you defining these terms? Just something I was putting out there.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Okay. Next up, question for David.
We already got this one.
We already got that one. Next question. Wrote it no less name. If I draw a heart in the sand, is the heart a thing?
What do you mean by thing? I mean,
Thanks,
I don't know.
Thanks, Jordan.
That's the first thing that comes to my mind. What do you mean by thing?
Leo Peterson, everyone.
What I'd say you have a bunch of, particulars, right? A bunch of grains of sand that have been, arranged in a particular way, like in a heart-shaped way. And I don't
I think this goes back to his pattern question, because the image is the pattern that correlates to the concept.
Yeah, and I'd say that the arrangement of matter does exist. I'm a little reluctant to say that a heart exists, because I'm generally understanding that to be an organ. We might say it's like a representation of a heart or something like that. So there's a little vagueness there. But what I would definitely say exists is this particular arrangement of matter.
You mean to tell me that your heart is not shaped literally like this?
Hate to break it to you.
And it doesn't do this when you feel something? Next question.
Tom and Jerry, we'd believe that.
From the Mirror Point, how does Leo address the hard problem of consciousness, being that it is currently considered unsolved?
I don't think there is a hard problem of consciousness. I think the hard problem of consciousness begs the question against physicalism by supposing that there is some sort of non-physical thing there before having demonstrated that there is, and then supposing that there's some bridge between the two that needs to be gapped. Well, I reject that there is some sort of non-physical thing there, and I reject that there is some sort of gap that needs to be bridged. I reject that there is a hard problem of consciousness. I think most physicalists, not all, but I think most physicalists probably would.
So I would also reject that there's a hard problem of consciousness for like the substance dualist. I do think that there's a hard problem of consciousness for Leo's position, and I don't think it's question begging, right? It doesn't have to presuppose that there is immaterial stuff, right? It just has to say that there are these certain features of consciousness, some of the ones I've been alluding to in this debate, right? Such as particular thoughts and perceptions, things that, prima facie don't seem to be physical objects. I think there is a perfectly legitimate question of how do you get those things out of, a purely material view. So I don't think that it has to be understood in a question begging way where we're assuming that these are immaterial, but just from that there is kind of a prima facie difference between mind and matter. And I mean, if there wasn't even a prima facie difference, we would have to wonder why, debates like this are taking place at all. Like the very fact that there is a mind-body problem is a result of there being a prima facie difference there.
So, I mean, if one wants to say, well, perhaps these differences aren't something non-physical, my immediate response is to say that I don't know what the problem for physicalism is. Perhaps there are just unexplained parts of human consciousness, which I don't think is a threat to physicalism. I don't think it's a threat to substance dualism or idealism or any view for that matter, but certainly not a threat to physicalism. There's a bunch of stuff that we don't understand that I would suppose most people are not prepared to say is something non-physical. Dark matter is one of them. We don't know what that is. We know it's there, but we don't know what that is. I don't think most people are going to say it's something non-physical. I think they're going to say it's something physical that we don't understand yet. So if we're already granting that perhaps this other stuff that we don't know what the connection is, isn't non-physical, then I wouldn't see what the immediate threat to physicalism is. My other response would just be to say that it's some sort of emergent feature of the processes and the functioning of the brain and potentially the rest of the central nervous system as well. I should clarify, I don't think consciousness is something furnished like strictly by the brain. I think that a variety of other organs are involved. I think the gut plays a role. I think the eyes play a role. I think that the perceptive senses that we have, in fact, play a very important role in the sustenance of higher order consciousness. I think if you had a human that was born that literally could not see, taste, smell, hear, or feel anything, they probably wouldn't be very conscious. I don't think that they would have the level of higher order, robust thought processes that me or JL or Dave happen to have. because I think that is furnished by experience with this vibrant and massively active reality that we are submerged within. And I think that plays a role in sustaining consciousness, and not just sustaining it, but sustaining it at the level that we find ourselves having it.
I don't think that eliminative materialists actually have a hard problem of consciousness. And
Agreed.
I don't know about, some of the stuff that you've said, seems very eliminativist, right? Denying that thoughts exist, denying that, sense data exists, denying that concepts exist. I don't think you identify that way, but a lot of what you say to me does sound sort of eliminativist. And so if that's the route you go, right, if you just deny that these features of experience, that like the hard problem of consciousness is asking you, how do you get that from matter? If you just say, oh yeah, I don't think that exists, then yeah, trivially, there's no hard problem of consciousness for you.
I don't know if I would say I'm an eliminativist about qualia, but I don't think I'm an eliminativist about consciousness. I think consciousness is a thing is at least as much as, like, say, temperature is.
We'll leave it there.
Cool. There are a couple questions I see that I think that
these are actually some good questions. I'm impressed. Keep it up. Keep it up.
There's a few here. That was one of them. So, question for Dave: Does Dave believe in a? Does Dave believe? Oh, was it Dave? Does Dave believe in a soul as well? And does Dave believe in a soul as well? And if so, is it equal to the mind or something else? If not, what else? Leo can comment, of course.
Yes, I believe in a soul. Yes, I think it's identical to the mind.
Leo?
I think it's kind of obvious side. No, I don't think there are souls. If there are, I just want to know how they interact with all of the stuff that makes up the brain and the body, and how that works. This is a point that Sean Carroll stresses, is that I'm going to repeat the quote exactly as he says it, and I'm going to put the emphasis where the emphasis needs to be placed. The physics of our everyday lives is completely known. So if souls play a role in our everyday lives, how do they interact with the core theory in a way that helps us understand what they're doing? And if they don't, in any way that we can measure and understand, then I just don't know what use it has. If it's not interacting, it's not interacting with electromagnetism or strong interactions with respect to atoms or any of the physics associated with our everyday lives, then at that point it just seems superfluous. I don't need to suppose that it's there to account for what the world is at those scales and what the world is doing at those scales.
So my friend Emerson Green has a really good video that he put out.
All of his videos are really good. What are you talking about?
A year or so ago, where he kind of takes down this talking point from Carroll. To put it as mildly as I can, the idea that the physics of our everyday lives is completely known is bullshit. It's not.
Well, I mean, I would just need to know what Emerson's
Where's my
argument
pearls?
for that is, because I don't think most physicists would agree with that. I think they would agree that the physics relevant to our everyday lives is.
Yeah, they might agree with it, but they couldn't
to our
justify
everyday
it.
lives. They couldn't what?
They might say that, but they couldn't justify that if you asked them to.
I mean, I think they could just appeal to the core theory, just appeal to all of the physics that we have, the physics and everything that emerges out of it, the biology, the geology, the chemistry, the atmospheric physics, and all of that stuff that's relevant to our everyday lives. There isn't anything that we relevant to the scale in which we exist and experience that we don't know.
Yeah,
there are things we don't know, but they exist beyond that scale. They don't, like dark matter. Dark matter does not matter to our everyday lives. It's completely irrelevant. Why there are 3 generations of matter, completely irrelevant to our everyday lives. Why fermions couple to the Higgs field through Yukawa coupling? We know that it happens. We have no fucking clue why. Doesn't matter. Why mass interacts with space-time? We know that it does. Why does it? We don't know. Not relevant to our everyday lives. There's a lot of stuff. So, and this is something, not that you're claiming this, but just to clarify, this is something that I think needs to be clarified with respect to that quote from Carroll, is that he's not saying that there aren't things, perhaps a lot of things, that we don't know. What he's saying is that the things that we don't know have no bearing on our everyday lives. You waking up, going to work, going to school, cooking food for your kids, and then taking them to soccer practice in your Chrysler minivan, whatever it is, the stuff that we don't know about the world has no relevance or bearing on that. And that's why it's relevant to our everyday lives.
That is straightforwardly question begging against substance dualism. I will leave it at that and refer people to Emerson's video on this for a full takedown of Carroll.
I mean, I don't think it's question begging so much as an argument against substance dualism. I mean, if there is this substance there, how does it interact with the core theory to causally affect things in the world? I think that's the question not just most physicists, but probably most neuroscientists would have.
I think you're going beyond
to know what it is.
You're not just asking, right, how does it do these things? You're saying that we know the physics well enough to say that it is not doing these things, right? You're saying there are
we would have measured it. If it's causally interacting, I can't see why we wouldn't have measured it if it's relevant to our everyday lives.
Yeah, I think the idea that like we understand everything that's going on in the brain, right? We know where all the energy inputs and stuff that are coming from. Like the idea that that is something that we know is just straightforwardly false from my reading on this.
Okay. I think we're good to spot there. From the Mirror Point, how do we justify the claim that matter exists independently of experience, such that we can say the mind is a physical process or interacts with the physical? And I'm going to take it that that question is probably for both of you.
I mean, matter has a history independent of humans, so clearly it was here before us.
But I think maybe
existed for 4.6 billion years. Humans haven't. So
if
the sun would depend on our experience, how was it here before we were around to be experiencing it?
Leo, I think it's asking like from an idealist perspective. So it's not necessarily saying on like human consciousness. It's asking why think that like the external world is not, itself a mental thing.
Because, I would argue because minds are a result of physical processes rather than the other way around.
Right, but you're familiar with like Berkeley's master argument for idealism, right?
I mean, I'm familiar with Berkeley's idealism, but I don't know if I've heard this particular argument.
So basically, Berkeley's argument was that like the only way that we know about physical objects is sort of like by their sensible qualities. Like we can't conceive of a non-conceived idea. So he tried to argue, and I don't agree with his argument, by the way, but I think this is what the question was asking, is it was sort of alluding to, if we only know physical objects by their sensible qualities, why suppose that there is something more to them than sensible qualities? And that's supposed to like push us to the conclusion that everything is fundamentally mental in this sort of idealistic world. I think that's what was being asked.
And that in that case, I would need to know what sensible like qualities is referring to. And I would just posit that they're sensible qualities because they're there and we can interact with them. That I don't see why I should need to suppose that there has to be a mind to interact with them for them to be there. They were there and we can interact with them. It's not we interact with them so they're there.
Well, if I was correctly interpreting that as sort of a popularized or highly truncated version of Berkeley's master argument, I would just refer people to a video on my channel called Why Not Idealism, where I kind of explain why I'm a substance dualist rather than an idealist. And in there, I take on Berkeley's master argument.
Okay. Let's see what our next one is. All right, make sure that. Question for Dave. Do you think the brain is a receiver? And if so, why do different parts of the brain seem to affect different thoughts if no other receiver does this?
I'm a little unclear on what he means by a receiver there. I do tend to think that the brain is like the point at which the soul interacts with the body, which, by the way, kind of answers one of Leo's points about the pairing problem, right? Like, why is it that if our leg gets cut off, we can't continue to move it? I think it's because it's been severed from the medium by which the soul interacts with the body. So that would kind of be my answer there. I'm not sure if that's what he's asking though. It kind of depends on what he means when he's asking if the brain is a receiver.
Okay. I think we already had that one. See if there's a... question. Nope, I guess we had that one too.
Mm-hmm.
For Leo, from the Mirror Point, if causation isn't fundamental, in what sense do physical processes produce or give rise to consciousness?
Well, the level that consciousness exists at, causation would be relevant because consciousness is not a fundamental feature of the world. At the fundamental level, the interactions are largely going to be defined, or I should say the relations are largely just going to be defined by whatever the gnomic structure, the sort of the laws of physics of reality are. And then those are just going to be that, they're just going to be that way. There is no explanation for why they are the way that they are rather than not. But at the level of reality that consciousness exists at would be like the level of reality that planets exist at. There are causes at that level. We're now at a scale of reality where causation has emerged out of what is fundamental, such that we can speak of things using causal language. The Earth orbits the sun because of the sun's mass, which curves space-time, and the Earth traces its geodesic through that curved space-time. Consciousness is a result of the physical brain because what consciousness is are those processes that arise from all of the relations shared by all of the various parts of the brain and the mechanisms that occur across the brain, all of the what, I don't know what they are, the ion channels and everything of that sort that happens in the brain, the electrochemical, neurophysiological processes. But that is going to be causal because we're not at the fundamental level of reality there. It would be like asking, well, if temperature is fundamental or isn't fundamental, how do you account for how my stove has a temperature? Well, because it does exist at the level where causality is relevant or where temperature is relevant. That's just if you asked what is the temperature of an electron, that would be meaningless. Electrons don't have a temperature. Electrons also are not consciousness. They're not in love. Stop saying that.
And I want to thank Theoretically for the excellent T-shirt recommendation because I'm probably going to end up making this, and it's all dark matter matters.
All matter matters.
All matter matters. I like all dark matter matters. All right, question for Dave. Given all the mythical creatures that have been dreamed up throughout history, would the conceivable must be possible claim imply that dragons are possible? Or dragons are logically possible?
Yeah, I don't think that there's any contradiction involved in the idea of a dragon. Remember, to be possible is not necessarily to be actual, right? And we are operating on like the broadest modal scope here of logical possibilities. So like the bar to be logically possible is pretty low. It just means there doesn't have to be a logical contradiction. And the idea of a dragon, right? There's not a logical contradiction. Therefore, dragons are logically possible. And obviously that's why they are, straightforwardly conceivable.
I mean, I would be surprised if somebody denied their conceivability. I just point them to this really cool TV series that's out there that's got dragons in it.
Typically, when people are asking questions like this too, they are confused about this issue of modal scope. So they think if I'm saying like a dragon is possible, they think I'm saying something like it's physically possible or nomologically possible, right? Given our laws of physics, it's possible for a being to like breathe fire and stuff. And Leo would probably know better than me whether that is actually nomologically possible or not. But given what I know, probably not, right? Yeah, when we're talking about logical possibility, we're just talking about the absence of a logical contradiction. So it is logically possible that I could jump to the moon, right? Because there's no contradiction. It is not physically possible. I don't have that capability. But saying I could jump to the moon is not like saying that there are square circles or married bachelors, right? Those are examples of things that are logically impossible.
Okay.
Modality is an interesting basket of I don't even know what it would be a basket of stuff that you can get tangled up in. Let's just put
Yeah.
it that way.
Yeah, so it gets technical.
There is an interesting anti-modality argument that I have heard that this conversation for another time, but eliminates it from contention, which I think is interesting. But that, like I said, it's a conversation for another time. Let's see what's the next question we have on the table is for both of you. Have either of you learned anything tonight?
I learned
And I said that as
Leo,
smarmily as I could.
I learned that Leo thinks that there are machines that can apparently type out your thoughts into text. So I'd be actually very interested if later on he wants to send me whatever he's talking about there, because I'm not familiar with that. I don't think that really
find that. Yeah.
I don't think that seriously would challenge any of my arguments, but I would be interested to see if we could get like the specific thought that I have in my mind, that like just a machine scanning my brain without like any input from me is able to type out what I'm thinking. That would be interesting to me at any rate.
I've probably learned some things. Whether I could like specify what specifically it is, I'm not sure. I mean, I have weird views on this. I think we're always learning. Every discussion, you learn something, even if you don't immediately recognize what it is. There's something that that's being learned there, which is why I enjoy these kinds of discussions, because they're challenging. You learn things, and I think it just helps to approach the world better when you have discussions with people, particularly people with whom you disagree.
Yeah, it's good not to be in your own bubble. It keeps you humble and more open to learning. So I agree with that.
All right. All right. I think that's going to be the last question we have. I think we are solid. Okay.
Oh,
So-
I don't know about you. You might be solid, but buddy, I am very fluid. Okay.
Oh yeah. You're definitely more fluid than I am.
I'm so fluid. I'm plasma. All right. I'm not just plasma. I'm cork glue on plasma. What's up? You don't even know the energies that I exist at, buddy.
Okay. So, I want to thank both of y'all. This has been amazing.
We do have one final question from our lovely producer Wes, who won
Wes
the debate. We all know, everybody, all three of us on the stage right now know who won this debate. G-Man. I don't know who's gonna get that joke and who's not. G-Man won this debate handedly.
I can't believe you'd bring that up. I really can't. I think, and I'm going to be as charitable as possible, I think that we're all winners because the viewpoints expressed today were deeply informative and everybody took away more information. And I think that the conversation did come to a logical terminus that gave people enough information to move forward with in their own inquiry. And that makes all of us winners. I'm
Liberal
so cheesy,
JL handing out participation trophies here.
I'm so cheesy. I'm just going to go set myself on a trap right now.
You know, if I got anyone to the point where they at least like think there's something to be said in favor of dualism and that the idea of souls isn't stupid, that's going to be a big enough of a win for me, because I have such a hard time even getting people to that point sometimes.
Oh, see, it gets me because as the mod, I mean, I have my own questions. This is a conversation that you and I could probably have like later on. It's just parsing out terminology and stuff like this, because I have big questions about that term in and of itself. And so I was kind of surprised it didn't really come up in the chat, but hopefully it'll be a question that we could parse out together sometime. But since that is going to be it, and this is actually perfect time, so yeah, and we have to remind everybody: G-Man never loses; he wins everything, everything all the time, forever,
every time.
Tenseless state, just win. So thank you to everybody out there. You're amazing. I want to give a giant thank you to our Patreon members who have made this possible. Members Paul Kamish, Karen Butcher, Hell's Bells, Logan Fisher, Amanda McLeod, Rion, D. Murphy, Dan D., Michael Wiseman, Sonny Shell, and Phil Calderone. I think I pronounced this correctly. Spank me if I didn't. And a giant thank you to all of the YouTube members as well. Kelly Laughlin, Logan Fisher, Stop the Stupidity, Infidel, Angela, Skeptical Scott, and tons of mice. You all rock. None of this would be possible. None of this would be possible without you and all the support that you do. So thank you very, very much. Everybody out there, thank you for your support, for being here in the chat. And a giant, giant thank you to all of our all the amazing crew who have like running things in the back and making sure that I don't make a fool out of myself like I did at the very beginning of the stream. And there's I know Wes and Mike, and I'm spacing on the others because I'm a total dunce. But you know who you are, and I love you. I love each and every one of you. So thank you very, very much. I probably need to put a list so I can commit everybody's names to memory. This is my first time moderating, so I was kind of like at the very, very beginning. So if anything that you all would have to say, or Ed, here at the end of all things, before we all go into the West.
I'll express my appreciation again to Leo, because I really do think you're one of the better counter apologists in the YouTube space. So I, again, appreciate the opportunity to interact with you. And like I said, hopefully we can do it again if we can find a third topic that we want to debate.
Yeah. That'd probably be the hardest part. Well, maybe not, but yeah, I want to. What was that? But I do think people, particularly the theists out there, if you're not subscribed to Dave, I think you should be. It's very unfortunate that his channel isn't at the size that IP's or somebody's is, because I think it should be. I mean, on the topic that we're discussing, he has a 9-hour video on substance dualism that I remember I only got about 3 or 4 hours of it watched. So substantial content, digging in deep, talking about these things. And I mean, I think he's fair in representing both sides. I mean, he talks about the objections to his view and then obviously his responses to those objections. So I think for somebody, particularly if you're a Christian, his channel is one you should go check out. And even if you're not, if you want to know what top tier Christian apologetics looks like, because as unfortunate as it is, we don't have that much anymore. I do think Dave's channel is one that you should check out. I really do.
Interesting note that IP has more that if anybody out there who wants to know what an objective crime is, IP having more subscribers than Dave here is an objective.
Somebody needs to find Michael and arrest him. This is unacceptable.
Just my stance, independently true of the universe, that it is a crime. It is criminal. So yes, be sure to check out both of these guys. Find their channel, subscribe to them, hit that like button, follow them. Yeah, they do amazing work and do amazing debates. So I hope you all enjoyed this. This has been fantastic.
What's more criminal?
What's more criminal?
That some slot generator like Frank Turek is more well known. It's just blows my mind.
Yeah, we agree on that.
See, bridging the divide. Like how I did that? Like how I did that? Yeah. All right. Huge, giant thank you to Skeptic Haven. And this has been the Thought Experiment. Y'all have been absolutely wonderful as an audience, and you two were fantastic. Thank you so much for the excellent debate. And I think that I don't know how to sign us out here. So I guess we'll see you all in the next one.
Thank you to JL's Beard for
moderator.
moderating.
Always.